Thanks, Julie, and thanks to Horse SA for inviting me to speak. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me this evening for this webinar on how daily life on our yards and adjustment centres affects horses and how we can help them cope with what can be a challenging experience for them. In this presentation, I'm going to discuss why confinement is difficult for horses and humans, the risks this presents to safety and well-being, and what we can do to make their lives run along the lines that nature intended. So first of all, because most of you don't know me, I'll say a little about myself. I'm a clinical animal behaviourist based in the UK but working internationally, and I help horse owners to resolve serious behavioural disorders that they might encounter with their horses. I'm qualified to do this at master's level, and I'm registered with the Animal Behaviour and Training Council in the UK, which regulates training and behaviour therapy. And I'm also a committee member of the Equine Behaviour and Training Association, which aims to educate horse owners and industry practitioners on the physical and psychological well-being of equines. So, as part of my work, I use the knowledge of the natural behaviour of horses to advise owners on meeting their horses' essential needs in order to have a healthy horse and one that's safe to hang out with or to ride and have fun on. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So, first of all, what is it about domestic life that means our horses might be missing out? We keep horses in a variety of situations, including yards in suburban areas, towns and villages, paddocks in adjustment centres located conveniently close to urban centres, and larger farms. The one horse, one owner phenomenon is a significant factor in how horses are managed. And this includes the normal cultural practice of buying and selling horses and moving them from one place to another in a way that we wouldn't do with our pet dog or cat, for example. And a study in 2017 by Carilli Thompson and colleagues found that more than 4/5 of horses in Australia were kept at pasture, and more than half of them were kept without any other equine companion. Just over a quarter were kept completely alone, and a further 27% had one pasture companion, but that companion wasn't a horse. Where horses were stabled or kept in a small yard, 60% had some form of daily exercise. That might be riding, lunging or leading. So that means that 2/5 of the horse population are not getting daily exercise. And some of these will be horses living either completely alone or with no other equine company. Many horses are kept in ways that mean that they are unable to engage in natural behaviours such as foraging or choosing when and where to seek water, shelter or shade. And the study pointed out several areas of concern, including social isolation and lack of exercise. So when horses are confined, it creates a number of physical and psychological challenges to them because they're prevented from performing many of their species-specific behaviours, including affiliative behaviours with companions. And they are, to a large extent, prevented from having any choice about what they do and when they do it. These missing factors in their lives can result in anxiety, boredom, and stress. And horses can become aggressive or bargy due to their restricted space, which obviously presents a safety risk to the owner and other caregivers, such as adjustment staff or trainers. And confinement itself also presents physical health risks because horses can't go through the essential movement routines for their bodies every day. And for sick or lame horses, isolation can cause a slowdown of their recovery rate because of the interaction between stress and compromised physiological functions. So if we look a bit more at anxiety and stress, I've already mentioned that confinement can be a cause of stress in horses. So let's look in a bit more detail at why this might be the case. We can clearly see that horses kept in stables, which is the equivalent of a broom cupboard in human terms, and who don't have enough exercise, are not having their needs met in a species specific way. And the same applies to horses who are confined alone in small yards or paddocks. This has an adverse effect on physical functioning and adaptability, because all organisms seek what's called homeostasis, or biological stability, and the body's ability to adjust its physiological systems is optimized when an animal is able to perform their ethological or natural repertoire of behaviours. And when natural behaviours are prevented, it leads to anxiety and stress. Long-term stress results in chronic arousal of the autonomic nervous system and overstimulation of something called the HPA axis, which connects the central nervous system and the endocrine or hormonal system in the body through the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal glands. And the release of stress hormones increases susceptibility to disease and dysfunction, typically causing inflammation and immunosuppression. And examples of this that we might see in horses are gastric ulcers or skin conditions such as sweet itch. Another important thing to bear in mind is the stereotypical behaviour that can develop in horses when we put them in situations of social and movement deprivation. Stereotypies such as weaving, box walking, crib biting or wind sucking are learned behaviours, and they're defined as behaviours that are repeated without any apparent or obvious purpose or function. And they're often described as abnormal because they are not seen in free-ranging populations of horses. They involve a need-related drive that develops in an environment with inadequate opportunities for satisfying that need. And once they're established, the drive to perform the stereotypic behaviour may become a need in itself. So it's very important that the horse's environment, however limited, satisfies their equine needs in order to prevent the development of stereotypical behaviour. Stereotypies used to be referred to somewhat unhelpfully as vices, stable vices, because they were undesirable from a human point of view, and they do represent compromised welfare for the horse. Studies have consistently related the incidence of stereotypies to management factors, including social isolation and the feeding of concentrates with little access to fibre. Something else we need to consider in terms of confinement is the effect of behavioural rebound when we're keeping horses in a restricted space. Researchers suggest that behavioural rebound, or post-inhibitory rebound, may result from an increase in motivation to move during a period where movement is restricted. So then when we move horses into bigger fields, or when you ride out in the wide open spaces, they can express high levels of activity, performing what we might call big behaviours, such as rearing, bucking or spinning round. And these big rebound behaviours present issues to ourselves and to horses because they risk injury. So behavioural rebound and the confinement that motivates it is also a safety concern. So looking at what the various health and safety risks are when confinement fails to meet the species-specific needs of horses, what exactly are those needs? To find out, we need to look at what's called an ethogram, and that's the name for a list of an animal's natural behavioural repertoire, and you can see the list on the slide there. If we look at safety first, horses live in social groups that are settled and constant, and that's in a natural situation. Individuals have a preferred partner or a pair bond for mutual protection. For example, one stays alert while one of them dozes. Eating behaviour involves, in a natural situation, grazing and browsing for up to 16 hours a day, and up to 10% of a horse's natural diet is made up of browsing on logs, branches, twigs and leaves. And that's retained from their early evolution as a small browsing species. And horses who don't feel safe, for example, because they're living in an isolated situation, may often stop eating or become fussy eaters, which can present problems. And similarly, because horses evolved to drink in groups for safety, an isolated horse may fail to take in adequate water. Horses groom themselves by rubbing against trees or posts or rolling, and that's part of their physical body maintenance. They also need to feel safe enough to defecate and urinate normally. And in a suitable environment, they would also be able to regulate their own temperature by being able to move to sunlight, shelter, or shade. In terms of resting or sleeping, they need to feel safe in order to act out normal sleep patterns. They rely on a group or one other horse in close proximity to be able to do this. They are a crepuscular species, so that means they're most active at dawn and dusk, and they have polyphasic sleep patterns. So they're sleeping, idling, dozing, or resting for short periods throughout a 24-hour period, and they should be able to mirror these patterns in their domestic environment. In terms of movement, horses move a lot. They do it to find resources, to escape threats, and to play. Movement is essential for effective physiological function, and a healthy horse should have sufficient space to walk, run, and play with other herd members. Exploration and investigation is a very important part of the ethogram, and horses explore their environment through movement and through what we call object play, which is exploration of objects with the nose, lips, and mouth. And then in terms of association, play behaviour and pair bonding, horses form pair bonds and they engage in mutual play, mutual grooming, and interactions with their preferred buddies and other herd members. Something called a time budget, also known as an activity budget or an energy budget, is a way of classifying the proportion of time that an animal spends carrying out different behaviours in a 24-hour period. And you can see here that the different proportions for free-ranging horses and confined horses. These pie charts represent a study by Dr. Martha Kiley-Worthington, who found that free-ranging Camargue horses spent 60% of the day eating, 20% standing, 10% lying down, and 10% performing other behaviours, compared with horses who were kept stabled and who were fed restricted forage. These horses spent only 15% of their day eating, 65% just standing, doing nothing, and they spent more time lying down. And interestingly, but not surprisingly, given the horse's fundamental need to live in social groups, another group of captive or managed horses who were kept in group housing with ad-lib hay and on straw bedding were the group that showed the time budget that most closely resembled the one seen in the free-ranging horses. If we look at another aspect of horses' daily lives, we need to look at something called choice and control. It's a crucial element of an animal's day-to-day experience, and it has a significant effect on welfare. So in a free-living horse's day, they are just almost constantly making choices about what they're going to do next, whether it's to run 500 metres, eat a particularly tasty piece of tree, or stand in just the right spot where the sun might warm their back the best. And if they can't make these choices, either because space is restricted or because the resources to do that aren't available, it can contribute to stress and anxiety. And if we think about animals in captivity, including domestic horses, they have the vast majority of choices made for them by their human caretakers, and they have little or no control over the environment surrounding them. And researchers found that having even the smallest choices can have a positive effect on behaviour and welfare. This can be even as small as having two different water containers, for example, a bucket and an automatic water dispenser, and being able to exercise a choice over which one to drink from. So we need to look at how we can meet our horses' needs then. And the aim of enrichment for horses living in stables and other small spaces is to minimise stress, anxiety and rebound behaviours. And we need to do that by enabling horses to carry out all the behaviours on their ethogram. And behaviourists refer to this as having friends, forage and freedom. Friends refers to social needs, including group safety, association with other horses and play behaviour. Forage, that's the need to graze and browse on a variety of foodstuffs in company for up to 16 hours a day. And freedom, well, that's the ability to perform all the other maintenance, resting and play behaviours that are on the equid ethogram. We mustn't, though, forget that you're part of the social life of your horse, and having you around will give him a lot of social enrichment. You can take him outside of his usual living quarters to graze, to meet other horses, or to explore his surroundings. You can take a camping chair in with him, sit and read a book, or clear down your emails on your phone. You can also act as a replacement for an equine companion by giving your horse some good wither scratches or anywhere else they like to be scratched, which has been found to lower heart rate and promote relaxation. So if we look at then forage first in terms of natural feeding behaviour, we need to provide horses with a choice of various foraging activities. That's a great way to extend the time that they spend on this behaviour. They evolved to consume an ad-lib high fibre diet by patch grazing on multiple sources of forage. So if you can provide a variety of types of hay, haylage and short chop forages, you'll go a long way towards meeting this need. And you can adapt that even more by feeding them off the floor, which is the natural way for them to eat, and spreading hay around to encourage movement while eating, because horses don't stand still and eat in the same place. They eat on the move naturally. And to introduce even more choice, you can put some hay into several small hay nets and hang them at different heights in safe places. And then you can make them even more interesting by sticking carrots or other veggies into the netting so that they're just visible, and they add another kind of enrichment factor to enabling your horse to forage better. Something else that one of the RSPCA branches in the UK has done is to develop herbal teas. So if you look at the buckets on this slide, they are all different types of herbal tea, which you can then pour, obviously cool, over hay or hay nets, or you can soak short chop forage in them. You can also add small quantities of different herbs to the hay and chop that you feed. You can even just feed in different containers. If you feed hard feed, it doesn't have to be mixed together. You can place it in different parts of the stable, or you can even scatter feed it on top of hay so that it takes longer to eat and it mimics natural exploratory feeding behaviour. We can facilitate browsing behaviour by putting tree branches or logs into stables and paddocks. And you can make these more interesting by smearing them with something that's sticky and low in sugar. And then you can pop any kinds of fruit or vegetables onto it. Anything that you can think of to make it more interesting and to add more variety to the many hours of feeding time that our horses should be engaging in every day. And then from the foraging behaviours, the final example of how to encourage this is to make a toy box for your horse, because horses naturally mouth unusual objects and shapes for reasons of play and exploration. So you set up a toy box, as you can see, or this is a toy bucket, I think, in the picture here, and give it your horse to encourage natural object play and also to get them foraging. If you can scatter sliced vegetables or fibre nuts inside it. And the toys that you use can include safe dog toys, cloths, old grooming brushes, tea towels. Change them regularly for interest and always supervise this activity for safety. Don't leave the toy box with your horse when you're not around. You can put it in the stable, the paddock. You can set it up on walks or rides so that your horse just happens to bump into the toy box by chance in different places, and that's a real jackpot find for him. We need to look at mental enrichment or mental stimulation as well for horses, and solitary object play is a key element of the equid ethogram. In this example, by giving this youngster a gym ball to play with, which encourages natural exploratory behaviour too. And then if we look at these two photographs, the one on the left shows natural browsing behaviour, and the one on the right is where the owner has put the logs, found some logs and put them in the paddock with the horses for them to browse on as an enrichment feature. And I need to thank Pauline Keel for these photographs and the next few that are going to come along. This is another example of enrichment that you can do in the paddock. So here, Pauline's developed a fake creek with different sizes of stone and then a bridge to go across it and a sand rolling area. So both these things add interest to what might otherwise be a somewhat sterile paddock. And then finally, Pauline also set up this misting station, which is just a hose with some holes in it draped over a tree, and at certain times in the day Pauline set up a timer so that the mist would kind of appear in the horse's perception at different times of the day, and the horses really quickly learned to pitch up at this misting station at the times when they knew they were going to get a nice misting. Also, there's a scratch post here, which has been set up by just buying some plastic matting, then wrapping them around the post. So that can be used for horses to scratch on, which is another natural behaviour and very enriching. So in summary, we've seen that confinement in a stable or a small lot or a paddock can present challenges to horses because it restricts their natural behaviours. But we can minimise the risk of aggression, reactivity or stereotypies by giving them as many opportunities as possible to perform the natural behaviours of their species. We can give them more choice and control over their environment, and by thinking up creative ways to give them access to friends, forage and freedom, we can help them to cope with confinement and enjoy their lives. So I just want to also draw your attention to a book that's coming out that I've contributed to. It's coming out in October. It's called Equine Behaviour in Mind, and what it's about is applying behavioural science to how we keep, work and care for horses. It's got various chapters, as you can see on the screen there, edited by my colleague Suzanne Rogers, and it's published by 5M Books. So that's coming out in October if you're interested in that. And that's it from me. Thanks for listening, and I'd like to thank Julie Fiedler and Horse SA for inviting me to talk to you this evening.